you, the Keymaster.
Well, welcome back for another episode of Desk Talks. I am Chase, your COO. I'm joined here today with Rob, our CEO, and Navy Bob. He is going to be our guest today. We're excited to have you. Bob, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. And such a pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here with us. I want to say good morning to Rob, too. Good morning, Rob. How are you?
Good morning from chilly Texas. For your weekly weather report, it's a brisk 28 degrees with a wind chill, making the real feel somewhere in the range of 22 degrees. And as my son would say, God, please turn the heater back on. It is freezing. That was our drive into school this morning. Please turn the heater on. It's freezing outside. But I'm great, man. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. It's about the same here in Kansas City. It's about 6 degrees. I don't know what the real feel is. I don't want to know. It's cold. Anything below 15 for me is cold. It just period in.
Yeah. That's
Bob,
cold
you're down there in Florida, correct? Is it still a little chilly down there for you guys?
It is a little chilly, but it's nice change, but not as cold as 15 degrees, but definitely cooler on the cooler side.
Well, I should have came down to you for this interview.
Kidding.
I messed up. I should have came down and sat with you for this podcast.
No kidding.
Well, let's get started here. Navy Bob, you are here with us to talk about your books that you have out, and you're going to talk to us about Leading with Love. I know that we've been prepping our audience for having you here for about a couple weeks here, and we're excited to open that up. So, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself? How do you see yourself?
So thank you so much. I spent 28 years in the nuclear Navy. I was a captain of a nuclear sub. I carried the nuclear codes for President Bush. Then I went into healthcare for 5 years, embedded in culture and high reliability. And then as I reflected back on my life, I found that the most impactful leadership style that is really not discussed today is leading with love. And that's what I want to share with this world, that there are no downsides with leading with love, that outcomes surpass all outcomes. You become a legendary leader and you build a field of dreams, legendary culture.
I know I'm speaking for my generation, coming from the Marine Corps and the Army, we're a little nervous whenever you say the L word, whenever you say the love word. Can you expand a little bit on that? What do you mean by love? Whenever you say leading with love, what does that mean to you?
So exactly. I didn't know what it was either. And when I started writing this book, love was not even in my vocabulary. I started looking at, is it transformational leadership? Is it transactional leadership? Is it servant leadership? All these things throughout my doctoral studies, I couldn't find a real definition to explain it. And once I came across Leading with Love and this relationship-based theory, it was an aha moment. It was a light bulb. And that was exactly what it is. And so if I reflect back, not only when I was captain of a submarine, but my entire career is when leaders had a mindset that it wasn't about them, it was about the organization and about the people that they served, that they sacrificially gave themselves for the benefit of others, outcomes went up surpassing all expectations. And so leading with love is not a sign of weakness. It is the greatest strength that any leader could possibly have. And that's where I came across Leading with Love.
Wow, I would agree. I think in my experience as well, looking back on the leadership that I've had, some of the best leadership I've had is people who actually cared about me, who put me before a mission, which unfortunately for me was a little bit more rare. But hopefully we can change that. In your book, Beyond the Sea, you talk about a lot of things. You talk about you had a XO, I do believe, that actually started formulating this thought for you. And I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Could you help me out here?
It was Gary Montalvo.
That's what it was.
Yeah, he is one of the best leaders. We still, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, we're texting, a group of us that were on the Texas. And so we're brothers from different mothers still today.
That's awesome. And in your book, you talked about a mission that you guys were doing. Can you speak on that just a little bit on how that kind of came about?
Absolutely. So this was the aha moment for me after I reflected back on this story. So I want to take you back when we were on a mission vital to national security, thousands of miles from our home port of Pearl Harbor. This is a $2 billion fast attack nuclear Virginia class submarine, and we're behind enemy lines. And we're a stone throws away from the most capable adversary submarine there is in the world. And we are cloaked underneath the ocean floor by the surface. And the only thing that's exposed is a periscope looking down at the bearing of an expected event. And we're surrounded by their fleet supporting this operation that's vital to their national security. And then all of a sudden, we start to hear this other radar that's already being saturated with all the other radars of their fleet. And I directed the officer of the deck who was in charge of the periscope to do a safety sweep, to look around to make sure there's nothing coming up. And as he's looking around, we see this plane directly flying low right over us. And I immediately yelled, I said, "Down scope," as the captain. And as the scope was coming down, you could see the pilots and the number of the plane on the tail. He was that close. I turned to my executive officer and I said, "Gary, this isn't good." So we raised the scope and we determined if there's other indications that they had us. And let me tell you what's at stake. If they had us, they would have done everything they possibly could, to include using force, to get us to surface so that they could take pictures of us, so they could put us on USA Today and make national embarrassment of us. We would have been briefed to the President of the United States. But if we failed this mission, if you take the cost of the crew, the maintenance, the cost of the submarine, this one event was going to cost taxpayers about $100 million. This one event. So there was so much at stake, you can imagine tensions are really high. And as soon as the scope raised, my operations officer in the next room said that we had other indications that that plane, by name, that just flew over us, said that they detected a foreign submarine. And he said, "Firecracker, firecracker, firecracker," which was our pre-rehearsed code that we were counter-detecting. And so I, as the captain, took the chances of just this flyover, that them having us from 70% to now it was 99.9% in my mind. And we needed to get out there. Every second counted. And I was about to announce, this command was coming out of my mouth. I was about to announce, left hard rudder, make your depth 400 feet, all ahead standard. This is the captain. I have the con. We are aborting this mission. And as I'm about to open my mouth, Gary comes right in front of me, puts his hand right in my face, and he says, Captain, he says, "We're already screwed." And if you read the book, you can tell, you could get a thing what he actually said. "Let's stick around to see if they have us." And I look at him perplexed. I'm like, "Gary, what else do you need?" And then someone else immediately spoke up and said, "That turnaround time of that other information, something doesn't seem right. It's too close." And then someone else spoke up. And then seconds turned into minutes, minutes turned into hours, and we stayed and we were successful. And it wasn't us. That plane didn't see us. That report was something that was miles away, and we successfully completed the mission. And so as I look back, if he was wrong and we actually were counter-detected, his judgment would have been in question. He probably would have never went to command of a submarine. And he did. He just screened for rear admiral. And
Awesome.
so there was so much at stake for him to speak up. And that was no other way to explain it. It wasn't transformational leadership. It wasn't transactional leadership. It wasn't servant leadership. There was no other way to explain it, was leading with love. And that's how I came across leading with love.
That's an amazing story. That's an amazing story. And as you're talking about it, in my mind, I'm an Army cat. So someone my specialty is boots on ground. I don't want anything to do with water, certainly not a submarine. I mean, what's that moment like for you? Whenever that call out comes down and the crew or you, firecracker, leaves someone's mouth. What's that like internally for you? Because I'm listening to you, and for me, I think, oh my gosh, like my stomach would drop.
So, Robert, I still have PTSD to this day.
I can
I still
imagine.
think about that. And at the time I went back, I thought this was a bad dream. I thought that this could not be happening. I thought I was in a different dimension. And we were going against an adversary that there was no doubt if they knew we were there, they would try to hurt us. And that anxiety, and I couldn't show it to the crew. I was the old man. I was 42 years old. They were looking to me for guidance. And I didn't want to let them down. And I thought for sure we were done. And your strength is in your team. These times when you have these crisis moments, you're going to be underneath so much stress to make a decision. And if you really want to improve the chances of your outcome, it's not going to be you. It's going to be what you have done previously to build your team, the psychological safety, the love, the relationships. And that is what I found with Beyond the Sea. We spend over 30% of our time at work. And if you think that these people are just objects to you, you're not going to succeed. It has to do as building these relationships. And this is why I wrote the book, and it's titled Beyond the Sea. This is applicable to any industry, at a leader at any level, and you can incur the same type of culture that there's a no lose situation. It's a win-win situation. And so that's where having this experience, I really wanted to share with the world and what was at stake. And this could be just transformational for any leader, future leader, especially with this younger generation.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Chase, I'm not trying to cut you off or take
No.
your duties here, but my mind is just going. You know, you hear these stories, and for me, Bob, just so you know, I was on active duty for 6 years in the Army, and then medically retired. I never had the opportunity to be forward deployed. Chase was, you were, and so you take those real world scenarios where decision making has to happen in a split second. And you think about how many people you have in your command or in your charge. And then I personally, we talked about this on another episode of Desk Talks, but taking those experiences in the military and translating them into the corporate world, into our current careers. How did you, in that scenario, this specific example that you just gave us, is there in your civilian career, has there ever been an equivalent event like that for you?
So, Robert, absolutely. So, I spent 5 years in healthcare, and there's no better probably example than a doctor operating on a patient. And there is critical time where life and death it can happen. And what I found is that this is where the healthcare world needs this more than anything today. It's because the culture, and there's times where, as a leader, you have to say, go take that hill because people are going to die if you don't act immediately. You have to have that courage, but that is 0.1% of the time, if less than that, 0.01% of time of leadership, that leaders need to do that. And that kind of, even me, didn't, underneath those circumstances, needed to act immediately. There was a time with my crew was able to speak up. And this is the quicksand that leaders are in today. The quicksand is they believe as a leader that they're supposed to direct people to do what I say, never challenge me. And this is, in a time of war and taking that hill, absolutely. There's time, place forever. But that is the mindset of all leaders. And I I know, and I seen it in healthcare, is if someone stops a doctor from making or cutting the wrong artery or operating on the wrong leg, this is not taking the hill. This, his greatest strength is his team able to speak up, psychological safety, to have transparency for backup and building those relationships in that culture in that operating room, just like I did on the Texas to prevent harm in the future. So, absolutely, that's why Beyond the Sea is so applicable to not only the military, those examples leading with love, but it's needed today more than ever in other organizations.
I couldn't agree with that more. I think that this is much like you said, just to echo that. Beyond the Sea, I would agree, is definitely it's a time for leadership. Leading with love is a different type of leadership that we need to carry forth into our future generations, right? And starting that, can come all the way down from your retail all the way up through, just like you said, into an operating room or into a nuclear sub. It's there's always room for that. Your people, like you said, are worth more than your bottom line. I know that I personally worked in a sales environment for a while, and I felt that way. I felt like the sale was worth more than myself. But looking back and reflecting, I put myself in that position, right? So leaving there and doing something different was beneficial for me. If you're not able to leave those positions and able to move on, is there anything that you can recommend to aspiring leaders that can affect their leadership now?
Absolutely. So in the book, I talked about the culture of the Texas wasn't always that way. That was 3 years into it, after at the pinnacle time of my ending of my career, or when I relieved as the captain. And at first, the crew was not functioning. We were the worst performing ship in the squadron. We had not the retention turnover was high, and we almost failed a major inspection. And we had what I call whack-a-mole. So you've all heard of the game whack-a-mole. And there were so many issues that were happening on the submarine that it wasn't if, it was when and where was the next incident. I couldn't predict it, but I knew it was going to happen. And they were happening at such a rate far above anything I've ever experienced before. And I was taking command of this new $2 billion nuclear submarine. And our task was to take this new ship and certify this new Virginia class for Arctic operations and take it underneath the North Pole. And some of the barriers, when you go underneath the North Pole, all the condensation in the engine room, because you're surrounded by 28-degree water, will come out. It's like a rainforest in the engine room. And these droplets of water are falling on these highly energized cabinets that are controlling the nuclear reactor. They had no idea what it would create with these new microprocessors, all these highly energized components. And if a water droplet fell perfectly on a microprocessor and shorted out the components that were controlling the reactor, and there were days that we couldn't surface because the ice was so thick and you couldn't restore the reactor because this is a new engineering plant, you died because you lose oxygen, you lose electrical power. And so we had that at stake. We had icebergs and we had foreign submarines trying to come out and try to track us, this new Virginia class. But my biggest concern wasn't that, it was the culture of the crew. They were apathetic and there was just no spark. You could just see that they just couldn't wait to get home. And so what I did, something simple, and I would love to share this with the audience. And it's even when I teach at UCF, students at UCF are taking this to their organizations, and the feedback I'm getting for something so simple, but it's so profound, is I instituted this simple thing called the crew top three. I put at the top of the page, put your name and put your 1, 2, 3. What are your top 3 concerns? And I knew I couldn't be reactive anymore. I couldn't wait for the next issue and then put all the time and effort. I need to get proactive to figure out why we were playing whack-a-mole at the extent we were. And I knew it was the culture of the crew. So I started this top 3 concern. And I went in front of the crew and I says, crew, I love you. I care for you. I need to know what your barriers are, what's your pebbles in your shoes. And I said, you don't have to put anything. I says, all I ask you to do is put your name at the top so that I have 100% accountability, and take 5 seconds, just put your name. I says, but if you do have something, please let me know what your concerns are. I went down to my stateroom, waited for the responses like a half hour later, and I get the responses, and there's a stack of pages like this. My stomach, I got sick to my stomach. And one of many things that were just profound to me was there wasn't sufficient number of computers on board. And on this new Virginia class submarine, it was something out of a Star Trek movie. Everything operated off of computers and half of them were broken. And what that entailed was each sailor had to spend approximately 2 hours extra of their time with the inefficiencies of waiting for a computer. And that was 2 hours that they couldn't spend with their families after their incredibly hard days on the submarine. The light bulb went off. The light bulb was, Chase, that the reason why they didn't care for the ship or the submarine was because the submarine didn't care for them. So I went up topside. I immediately mustered the crew back 2 hours later, and I went in front of them and I said, I am so sorry. perked up. They never heard that before. I love you. I care for you. I had no idea that you are going through all these issues. And I showed them the stack. I says, we're going to address this immediately. I already got all new computers. We're at 100%. I went up to every single submarine in the squadron and also at squadron. I said, this will never happen again. I am so sorry. And I'm your captain and I love you and I care for you. That was the spark that changed the culture. And about 3 months later, there's a picture of us at the North Pole. And that was where the culture changed, where the crew was no longer fearful of making a mistake to get in trouble. They were fearful of making a mistake because they didn't want to disappoint their other crew members. And when you get that critical inflection point in culture, that's where your outcomes will go like the movie Back to the Future, 88 miles an hour. They just take off. And in 2.5 years, we became the number one ship of 10, objectively ranked in the squadron to get the Battle Lead. We had the highest retention, lowest turnover in the Pacific Fleet for 2 consecutive years in a row. And remember, commanding officers calling me up, like you were saying, how can you improve this? Bob, how do you do it? And I would just say to them, I said, take care of your crew personally and professionally and make that your highest priority. You too can have a high retention, low turnover. And we scored the highest possible grade on a nuclear engineering exam. And it wasn't me. I wasn't anything special. All I did was focus my efforts on taking care of the crew authentically. And my mindset was that my crew is my most important thing. And the crew took care of the ship. And you look at what are the outcomes? There's no doubt that Gary would have spoke up if that culture wasn't there. So not only did we become those incredible outcomes, we saved the taxpayers $100 million. We built a legendary culture. We had legendary outcomes, and we had incredible crew that was so proud to be on board. And so one of the things that the crew top 3 going back, what this did, it provided 3 things. One, if you really want to improve your retention at any organization, McKinsey did an article in 2021 during the Great Resignation and Great Redesignation was feeling valued was the number one reason why people were leaving. If you want to make people feel valued, ask them with the crew top 3, what are their top 3 concerns? Because if you don't ask them and assume that they're just okay, they're not going to feel valued. The second thing it does, it provided transparency. Never again was I'm going to get blindsided by not having computers. 3, it provided that mental gym of, I expect you to speak up, like Gary. There was something I did every month that I solicited the crew top 3 where gave Gary the courage, because that was the expectations of the crew to speak up. And if I don't know if he would have spoke up, he may have anyways, but clearly the crew top 3 was the mental gym, the process that allowed the crew members to speak up, just like Gary. And I'll tell you, the biggest litmus test that we changed the culture, I continued the crew top 3 all the way to the end of my command tour. And at the end, it was the last one, I still solicited, and there was one concern left of the entire crew. It went from this to just one about when I was about to leave the submarine. And that was, and this is why it's just, is there wasn't sufficient variety of hot sauces on the mess decks. That was the number one concern. And if you can get concerns about not having a hot sauce, or the temperature's too hot or too cold, or parking's not adequate or whatever, you know that you're becoming a legendary leader. You will build legendary outcomes, and you will have incredible results.
Speaking of legendary leadership, speaking of your going back to where you were going going to North Pole, I saw a picture of Santa Claus, of your crew with Santa Claus up there. Who snuck that aboard? You can't have a good culture without having a Santa Claus suit snuck aboard.
That was the crew. The crew, they will come up all these great things of supporting the crew and social things. So yeah, that was something that was just, I called Mrs. Bush from the North Pole, and she was a ship sponsor, and it was just a magical time. And it was hard. It was times that I looked, and just going back to the dark days when I took over, I looked in the mirror and I was fearful with all the whack-a-mole that's going on, was I was fearful not only for my life, but the life of the crew, because there was such a rate of errors that I knew we didn't have critical thinking. I knew we didn't have backup. And I was really concerned. And my first instinct as a leader, like most, is that you want to punish people. You want to get vindictive. You want to hold people accountable. But I didn't do that. I led with love. I looked in the mirror and I said, what am I doing as a leader? What resources am I not giving them? What culture am I setting? And until I figured that out and set the current standards to make sure that they had the resources, I held myself accountable before I held others accountable. And that was the gift of leading with love.
Well, Bob, as you're talking about that, I think I reflect on something Chase said to me one time, in that people who say a job is easy, it's not. It's easy for you, but it's not for everyone else. And what you're talking about, you challenged the entire militaristic institution of authority. You respect the rank, you do what you're told, you are held accountable, and there will be consequences for your action or lack thereof. And so I read the book. I hear you talk. In my opinion, you kind of wear your heart on your sleeve here. And that's the leadership style. What's that? You are almost at a pivot point, right? You collect those stacks, you collect those complaints, you collect those pebbles from your crew. I'm sure reading through some of those, if you're being honest with yourself, I'm sure reading through some of those, you're like, really? This is what we're complaining about? There's not enough hot sauce? You take that and you reframe your mindset. What was that initial, whenever you're standing on the parade deck and you're looking at your crew and you say, hey, I'm sorry. What was that moment like for you?
It was a moment of me, an aha moment, because also it was an embarrassment moment. It was a concerning moment, because right before I did the crew top 3, it was literally like a week before, I was sitting in my stateroom and my computer died as a captain of a nuclear submarine. Within an hour, I had a new computer up and running. So in my mind, I never ever knew that we were lacking computers. And so when I had that stack, I got concerned. I got scared. What else is out there that I don't know that the crew is suffering with, that I don't know? I'm the captain. I'm supposed to take care of this crew. When you have something that's preventing the crew to be home with their families, not because there was something we were ready to do, we were getting ready for war, there was something that could have been avoided, and they knew that. And I, as the captain, am responsible for that, and I didn't know that. So when I was in front of the crew presenting this, I did feel terrible that I let them down. And this was unacceptable to me, and I knew it wouldn't happen again. And I would tell the senior enlisted on board that didn't like it because it showed them that they weren't doing their job to make sure that they were supporting the crew as well. And I would tell the senior Cobb, chief of the boat, I said, no, this is healthy. This is healthy. And this is exactly what makes good submarines great submarines, by able to identify things that we can fix. And one of the things that I come across is that, what happens if you get something that you can't fix? That's just as important of fixing something, because then you could tell them that you acknowledge their concern. You're either going to mitigate it or you're not going to do it. And the reasons why you're not going to do that is X, Y, and Z, right? It's when you lead with love, there's some things you can't do for the greater good of the mission or the crew. And when you tell them that, if you don't address it, they will sit, and just fulminate of thinking of how they're not getting something that they think they deserve. And this causes the complaining, and it spreads throughout the submarine or any organization like cancer. It's a virus. And so if these leaders don't proactively hear what their concerns are, you're spreading a virus of discomfort and lack of productivity and disgruntledness that you as a leader don't want to face.
I wouldn't want to face that level of, I wouldn't want to face that. I can tell you from a personal experience, I remember being with 10th BSB up at Fort Drum, and we were 6 months behind on cyclic maintenance. in our motor pool. And I can promise you, I don't think I've spent that much time at an office in my life. When the commander found out that we were 6 months behind on cyclic maintenance, we spent so much time getting caught up. But it was worth it. It brought us together as a unit. We were getting ready to deploy. We were having to take those assets with us. So being able to get those assets together, and he did a great job by allowing us to bring in movies. He put in movies and allowed us to, in the motor pool bay, and allowed us to listen to music, which was uncommon in uniform. But he allowed it and allowed us to kind of be a little bit more comfortable as we got ready. It sounds like that might be something what we're talking about, leading with love, right?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, Chase, is that leading with love is not, I get this as well. Leaders think that when you lead with love, your outcomes are going to go down. Like you're soft, you're going to, not demand results. And in fact, it's actually much different. Leading with love, as I'm inspired by Mr. Rogers, and I think we talked about this. Mr. Rogers, my neighborhood, has this wonderful quote that says, love and then success. It has to be in that order. It's that simple and yet that difficult. It is difficult because it's easy just to hold people accountable, tell people what to do. That's easy as leadership. But what's really hard is to develop a relationship with love and then empower your entire team to go above and beyond what they're capable of. The results will take off, like I said, 88 miles an hour. And I would tell you that success is really important. You're not leading with love if you're not worried about success. Because when you have success, one, your safety record goes up. You're protecting your crew, your organization. Two, your outcomes are going to go up. And which means there's more promotions. There's more people getting recognized. And that is leading with love. One of the greatest gifts I had as a captain wasn't that we got great accolades on different inspections or so forth, is when I saw the crew get promoted at a higher percentage of other people because they came from a boat that was really doing well. And a boat that's doing really well, you have a higher percentage of people that get promoted. There's no doubt in my mind. And that was the greatest gift for me, to see there was a higher percentage of people being promoted because I loved them. Success showed that I loved them. So this is something that is just in the mindset of these leaders, that if they lead with love, they're going to be seen as weak, or success is not going to come. It can be further from the truth. If you really want to be a legendary leader, have incredible success, you lead with love first, and then success will follow.
Well, it sounds like you have seen a lot of success with leading with love. You went from going into the nuclear Navy, then you went over to the White House and you served with the president over there. Can you kind of share with us what that was like?
So absolutely. And if this is another reflection back, if you look at the book, it's kind of like a chronological order. I talk about growing up, then my time in the Navy, but there's a couple chapters on me spending with President Bush and Mrs. Bush. And there's no other way to explain that experience other than leading with love. I talk about how, like, for example, he has nicknames for everybody. And the reason why he has nicknames for everybody, I didn't ask him specifically, but he nicknamed me Navy Bob. And the reason why, here's the president of the United States, the person of the free world, the leader of the free world. And he has time to call me a nickname and show me respect and give me, it was something that I felt part of the team. It showed that he spent time and he was concerned about me. And in turn, what that did, and you could see it throughout the entire staff, there's never been, in my opinion, a tighter knit organization around a central person that led with love. We're still in contact today. And there's no other way to explain it, just like Gary Montalvo, is that you had that culture of leading with love. Outcomes went up beyond belief. It's because he knew that he would sacrifice himself for the benefit of the country or the people that work for him. In reciprocal, people that worked for him would do the same. And that's where you saw leading with love. And so I have so many stories with him about leading with love. But one of the greatest stories that I had was just how he treated other people. And one of the things I talk about is that as his personal aide, carrying the nuclear codes while we were at the ranch, this is when in 2008, 2007, 2006, where we did the surge, where he went against all his advisors. He put more troops in than they were directed to pull out. And so he had that burden of having an increased casualty rate. And I had the burden of every morning when I was his personal aide at the ranch to present the situation report of the morning at 5 o'clock. It was like clockwork. At 5 o'clock in the morning, I would be outside his house waiting for the light to come on. And 5 o'clock was like clockwork. He'd get up, walk across, turn on the coffee pot, go take care of morning business. And then he would come out and he would say, Navy, how did we do last night? And I knew exactly what he was saying. The first thing he wanted to know is that, did we lose anybody? Did we lose any of our service members? And those days that I would tell him, and I would just be as excited as he was. I'd say, Mr. President, I said, great news. We didn't lose anybody last night. And he would turn into like a kid in a candy store. He would say, what are we doing today? Are we cutting brush? Did you see Barney? I think it's after, he's just like a kid in candy. And he'd be in his shorts and a t-shirt, shoveled hair. And he, just me and him underneath the stars. But those days that I would tell him we lost 3 or 4 of our beloved members, service members, he would just take the paperwork and turn around and walk back in. Wouldn't say a word. That was not putting on a show for me. It wasn't putting a show on for press. There was no one around. You could see how that really impacted him and how he loved the country and, as the commander-in-chief, the people that served underneath him.
Wow.
Well, I mean, for reference, I don't know if we stated here, for anyone listening to this, anyone watching, Bob, you had the opportunity to serve as aide for President W. Bush, correct?
Yes.
Did you serve in any other administration after that?
No. I left right then. But I did meet his father, Bush 41, and he is an incredible hero as well.
Yeah. And you talk about the ranch, so you spent time in Texas, I would assume, is what you're referencing.
Absolutely.
I'm still working my way there. One day, maybe. One day. I've heard President Bush is quite the pig hunter. And so did you ever have the opportunity to go hunting with him?
No, I didn't go hunting, but clearly a lot of bike riding. So he loved bike riding. And he also would do this 100-degree club in the summer in August, where he would have a run, and it had to be about 100 degrees, and he would give people T-shirts there. So no, he did not pig hunt when he was there, but I'm sure that he picked that up after his administration.
Well, you're probably right. I'm sure with his abundant free time, being the most popular leader in the world, he had the opportunity to go hunt. Well, I'm listening to you talk, and then I think about, President Bush. One thing that I think separates good leaders from aspiring good leaders, because I don't think there's a bad leader. I think we're all just learning. You put yourself front and center. You get to know your crew. You get to know your employees, and you understand strengths and weaknesses of those employees, and then you try your best to put individuals in a place to succeed, which is clearly something President Bush did for you. And so I'm really curious. You're on active duty. And then how does that happen? Do you get a piece of paper? Does it come in an email, a phone call? Hey, Bob, we're going to pull you over to the White House as a naval aide for the president.
So great segue. So I reflected, like, is there a higher calling? What got me to this position? And I reflect back. If you read my book, I grew up on a farm. I was a average plus student. And if you look how I got into the nuclear Navy, and 1/3 of the accessions into the nuclear Navy come from the Naval Academy, 1/3 come from ROTC, and 1/3 come from NUPOC. And so I got into the NUPOC program, and 1/3 of the accessions come from the Academy. And you know how hard it is to get into the Naval Academy. And yet there's people at the Naval Academy that don't qualify for the nuclear Navy. And so they only take 1/3 of the accessions from the Academy. And so here I am in a pool of incredibly talented individuals, from the NUPOC program, from RPI, from the Naval Academy to Rensselaer. Here I am, this kid who grew up on a farm with mediocre plus grades. And I screened for command on my first look, only 8%. And to get qualified or selected for XO at the time was like 45%. So they only take 45% of the people that were the cream of the crop of the country that get selected for XO. And you only take 8% selected for command on their first look, which I did. Overall, it was something like 60%, but the first look was 88%. And because I was selected for first look, that is how I was selected to go interview amongst all the other cream of the crop other organizations such as Navy SEALs, helos, F-14 pilots, F-18 pilots. And I was in this pool of 6 other people interviewing for this prestigious job. And they selected me. And as I look back, and I'm not boasting that I did this, and I reflect back, what was the reason why? And the reason why, there was no doubt, it was because I led with love. It wasn't because of my technical ability. It wasn't because of my tactical ability. It was because I cared for people. And when I cared for people, I brought out the best of people because they knew that I wanted them to succeed as a leader. And when they saw that, they did everything possible for the ship to succeed and the people around them. It was the culture. That was the 88 miles an hour. And so you asked me, how did I select for command on my first look? It's because I was on one of the best ships. And it wasn't because of me, because it was the culture. And because I was on the best ship, I was selected above my peers. And so the key for this story that I'm telling you, is that I grew up on a farm in Western New York. I wasn't anything special. But what I did is I led with love, and that unlocked so many opportunities for me. And it wasn't because I did it on purpose. No, it was because I unselfishly gave myself to other people, and those people unselfishly gave themselves to me in the command. And when leaders can see that it's doing the opposite of giving yourself to others, that you will get more in return than if worrying about yourself. That is the gift of leading with love. And that is why I became the naval aide to the President of the United States. There's no doubt in my mind. The only thing that differentiated me was I took leading with love to the next level.
I love that. Chase, I'm looking at you now. I mean, we're both listening to Bob talk, and I hear him keep saying, I didn't do anything special. I'm nothing special, right? And I feel like you hear that so often with people who have done so many incredible things. I didn't do anything special, but Bob, I hear you talk, and I know we met before. We had a good hour-long conversation while we were setting up this podcast, and Chase and I, we got done with that conversation. Chase and I did a little bit of follow-up, and he and I both just kind of stared at each other in the camera. Wow, there's an air of openness and just being genuine. This is who I am. I'm here for you. But there's that empowers the leaders who are underneath you. Whenever you have a leader who is that way, who's open, going back to what you said in the beginning of this episode, you hear firecracker, your immediate response, you said it. I'm not going to baffle misquote your command here because I would do a horrible job, but you're going to give the command to kind of, not to be pejorative, but turn around and get out of that situation, pull everyone out. And then your lieutenant says, well, hang on, that may not be us. It's the leadership in that moment, the gall, and pardon my French, but the balls to take that advice from your lieutenant in that moment. That very well could be a life or death scenario. But I can't imagine what that's like. We talk about leadership, and I know this is a long-winded way to say it, but you talk about leadership. You talk about leading with love. But did you feel like that empowered the leaders underneath you to do what you do?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the stories that I have in the book is that by leading with love, you get something much greater than the 3 things I talked about outcomes, legendary leader, and a field of dreams, legendary culture. What you get is leading a wonderful life. And one of the things that I did by leading with love, building those authentic relationships, I got to know something simple of who the sailors' wives are, just by name, just basically to see what concerns they had. And I would drop everything if they did. And one of the sailors that I knew, his name was Petty Officer Mankins. He was a machinist mate that we overlapped for like a year on board. And I left after I was relieved as commanding officer. My time was up. I went to Millington, went back, and 4 years went by. I went back to be the Commodore of Squadron 7 in Pearl Harbor. And I'm out running one day, and I see him. And we only overlapped for a year. And he sees me. He says, Captain Ronsk, is that you? I says, Petty Officer Mankins, is that you? He says, absolutely. He says, how you been? It was like yesterday that he says, I said, how's your wife, Amber? He goes, she's great. Do you mind if I stop by your office later today? I says, absolutely. So he comes to my office and he says, listen, he says, Amber and I have been trying to get pregnant for 3 years and we can't. We know it's an infertility problem. And he says, we've been on the list at Tripler Hospital for 2 consecutive years. And we finally, after waiting 2 years, we're on the list to get infertility treatments, and we can't afford this out in town. And this is the only opportunity we have. And I was about to stand up and give him a hug. He says, there's one problem. He says, I was always, when I first got to the command 4 years ago, I was always supposed to leave in October of this year. It's now April. And he says, 2 weeks ago, I just got orders or an assignment to go to Charleston, South Carolina. It's a nuclear billet. And I'm leaving in June. And my first appointment is in July. He says, I've been to my commanding officer, my Commodore. No one is helping me. It's been 2 weeks, and every day I go up. And when I call the person placing me, he basically yells at me on the phone and says, stop having people call me. He says, they're orders for a reason. Suck it up, Buttercup. Try harder. Stop calling me, and I'm not going to, this is the last time I'm going to talk to you about this. You're leaving in June, and these are nuclear orders. You're going. I saw red. I picked up the phone. I immediately called this individual, and I says, listen, shipmate. I know that this isn't a crisis of war, that he needs to be there in October. This is a convenient thing for you to put numbers in. I go, there's so much at stake. I said, this is what you're going to do. I go, you're going to change these orders back to October. I said, if you don't change these orders back to October, I'm calling the 4-star naval nuclear admiral myself. And I'm going to talk about how you're treating people in our nuclear Navy. I says, I'm giving you till Friday to change orders. If you don't, I'm making the phone calls. And October came, and he calls me from the airport, the Honolulu airport. He tells me that his wife is pregnant. And 3 years later, as I'm writing the book, I haven't seen him since. Like last year when I'm writing the book, he sends me a picture of his daughter, who's now 3. He says, you and God are the only reason why my sweet Caroline is here. Mm. And it was a simple 5-10 second phone call. And that gift far exceeded anything that I've ever done, tracked any submarine, watched any missile launch or operation or anything in my life, even carrying the nuclear codes, knowing that I made that much of a difference in someone's life. And all it took was a 10-15 second phone call. That is the greatest gift of leading with love. If I didn't lead with love, he, after 4 years, would have never, ever, ever dreamed about asking me to help him out. And yet he got one of the greatest gifts that's ever is in his life. But I also got I started to cry. The euphoric feeling I had was just incredible. And when you ask, he says, after we get caught up, he says, I have took your message of leading with love, and I have put my fingerprints on countless of individuals of this is how we treat other people. So if we can start this match of leading with love, you're going to start to see this taking off. When people realize that leading with love, there are no downsides. It's hard, and it's contrary to what we've been taught in the past. But once you lead with love, because you're only on this earth for such a short period of time, do you not want to be a legendary leader? Do you not want outcomes to surpass expectations? Do you not want to build a legendary culture? Do you not want to lead a wonderful life? Leading with love is the answer, and this is why I'm so passionate. And I'll leave you with this, is that Mr. Rogers had this famous, if you read anything about Mr. Rogers, he died and he had a note in his wallet that he got from a building at Rollins College, and it had "Life is for service." And it's on a building at Rollins College. You can go see it today. And when he died, this note was in his wallet. And Mr. Rogers says that God has put us on this earth for one purpose and one purpose only. And that purpose is to serve others. And when you find that service to others, the wholeness, the fulfillment that you will feel will be undeniable. And I like to reflect on the movie It's a Wonderful Life. George Bailey. We all seen it. George Bailey thinks he's a failure. He calls to God. He says, I wish I would have never been born. Clarence comes and grants him the gift to say, all right, George, you've never been born. He then sees that his brother would have died. He went and got the Medal of Honor. His wife would have been an old maid. Mr. Gower would have been in jail. And Pottersville would have been named Bedford Falls. And at the end, his brother comes in and says, to the richest man in town, to my brother, George Bailey. So if you want to lead a wonderful life, it's about doing good things for others. It's not about making money. It's about how much you can support and give to others is really the gift of life. And so that is why leading with love, I want to share this with all these leaders out there, that my mindset is not to sell books. It's not to be, it's about to share this. I do believe, and I'll leave you one last thing. I'm good friends with Gene Becker. He used to be the chief of staff for Bush 41, President Bush. And I just recently reconnected with her in Houston last month. And I saw her, she has a book out as well. And it's called Character Matters. And she talks about President Bush 41. And she shares a story that he would frequently say, why me? Why me? He would frequently tell her that, why me? And what he was referring to is when he was a pilot in World War II, he got shot down doing a bombing run over this island called Chichijima, which was inhabited by cannibals. And he crashed his plane about a mile from the island. He was miraculously saved by a submarine. And these cannibals were coming out to get him. And if they would have captured President Bush, he would have been eaten alive. He was a cannibal. But yet some random submarine comes up and rescues him. And out of the 3 people that were on the aircraft, he was the only one to survive. So the question he had to a higher being was, why me? And at that point, he would tell Gene is that he believes that his life is no longer his life. He has a higher calling of why he was saved, of why me. And that's what he served his life, of a higher purpose of doing good things for others. And you could see the impact that President Bush had on this world. And he always had the mindset of helping others. I have that. I'm not saying I'm anywhere clear or close to President Bush. No way. But I do have that same drive of this pure intention of wanting to make this world a better place by leading with love. And that is where, it's going to take one person at a time. But if we can get this critical mass, you're going to start to see leadership changing for the future.
Well, Navy Bob, I want to thank you so much for being here with us. And thank you so much for the pearls of wisdom to all of you who have not had a chance. It is called Beyond the Sea. It is an incredible book. He has another one that is out that I have not picked up and read yet. Bob, would you mind sharing that one with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is high reliability healthcare. So I wanted to share the secrets of the nuclear Navy to improve patient safety. It's the 3rd leading cause of death in the country. And as I'm writing this book, along with Beyond the Sea, I have found a critical piece of 2 equations, 2 unknowns. You can't have high reliability or safety culture without effective leadership. And you can't have effective leadership if you're unsafe and don't have high reliability. You have to have both. And so both of these books together talk about to be able to build this culture in not only in any industry, but this other book is specifically for healthcare and the tools that you could use today to be able to improve safety.
Boy, 2025, we couldn't use this message anymore, could we? I mean, good gosh. We all need to stand up and lead with love. Bob, we want to thank you so much for being here with us. We are so grateful and humbled to be in your presence. What an incredible episode and an opportunity for us. I know that you definitely have 2 people and our followers that will definitely be starting to lead with love if we haven't already. Thank
Great.
you.
And there's one piece is that, I have multiple different tools, but do the crew top 3 today. You could start that. In the process, if you have questions, you can go to our website, www.navybob.com, where we have a template that you can use. So please reach out anytime. And again, our goal is to make this world a better place. And one of the greatest tools that used for me is to start is the Crew Top 3. And really can't appreciate you both anymore of your podcast, and just incredible what you're doing for this world and our community. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Thank you. And that website will be linked in the description below of this video. We'll highlight that on our YouTube channel and on our Spotify. I'm sure Chase will throw that up on social as well.
I sure will. Thank you so much, Navy Bob. We appreciate you being here with us today.
No, thank you.
Until next time.
I was built to last with the webs I'm weaving. I could change the past with all I'm achieving. Got my foot on the gas, never stop competing. If you break my glass, then this life's gonna end.
I wanna be the best in the game, invest in my name. Check no restraints, I'm obsessed with the pain. I ingest, I retain, assess and I change. Possessed by the thought I'll be free one day from society's restraints. Money, clout and fame, mud, disease, a plague. We all